Hello, Vasasinka. Welcome to week 5, part 2, where we will go over the last part of your notebook for this week and sort of how to write your argumentative paragraphs. So if you do not already, go ahead and pause this video and open your week 5 notebook. Alright, so up to now you should have your discussion questions done for reading James A. Garfield, James Who. You should have already read those and answered those. We talked about those in part 1. And also finished your Mentor sentence, which we also discussed in part 1. So today we're just going to work on our argumentative paragraph. The prompt is, in a persuasive paragraph, convince others if doctors should be accused of James Garfield's death or not. You should know now by now that having read the article that you read for your assessment, as well as James Garfield, James Who, that although President Garfield was shot in the back, he also probably, maybe, most likely would have lived if doctors would have left him alone. So the question here is, should the doctors be accused of his death, or maybe manslaughter, which means not purposeful death, or should Goodyear, who's the man who killed him, or shot him, sorry, I should say shot him, be accused of his death? So looking at this, let's go ahead and just write this paragraph together because I've gone over this paragraph with you a little bit. I've talked about the different argumentative techniques, but I want to show you sort of how to do this paragraph. And I will be writing this with you on screen here, but you may, you know, change it, adapt it, write it, make it your own any way that you want to. You also might not argue it the same way that I do, so you may, you know, choose something else, okay? So you can write this the other way, but this is a sample paragraph. So let's go ahead and begin. So for starters, your topic sentence, the first sentence you write, is going to be a repeat of the prompt. And the prompt is, should doctors be accused of James Garfield's death or not, right? If doctors should be accused of James Garfield's death or not. So your topic sentence will say one of two things. You will either say doctors, the doctors, or doctors should be accused of President James A. Garfield's death, period. So that is one way to write this topic sentence, or the doctors should not be accused of President James A. Garfield's death. So this part here is the only really difference between your topic sentences. Now you can write topic sentences different ways. You could say President James A. Garfield was assassinated, but the doctors should be accused of his death. That would be another way you could do this. You can kind of reverse and just say President James A. Garfield's death was the responsibility of the doctors as opposed to the man who shot him. There's a lot of different ways you can write this sentence. This is just sort of the basic model of a topic sentence. So make sure you have a topic sentence written. Pause the video now to write that topic sentence. Now that you have your topic sentence written, the next part of any paragraph is evidence. So you have this strong topic, you have this strong statement that is your opinion. Now you need to make some evidence to back it up. I'm going to highlight that topic sentence in green so we can recognize it as the topic sentence. And then as we go forward, we've done this before in the past, but we are going to then make our evidence be highlighted yellow and our explains highlighted red. One of the reasons why we do that highlighting is to show a visual representation of the organization of a paragraph. So the next thing that I want after this is some evidence to show, and I'm going to write that they should be accused of his death. So I'm going to take out the not. That was just an example for you. But obviously if you're writing not, that's totally fine. So I'm going to find some evidence that suggests that the doctor should be accused of President James A. Garfield's death and list that here. So from this article that you all read for your assessment, How Doctors Killed President Garfield, by CBS News. Okay, so CBS News is given the credit for this because it says it right here. There's no other title or person. I'm going to use this quote right here. If they had left him alone, he almost certainly would have survived. So that's one good quote that I'm going to use. And the other one was... Within minutes, doctors converged on the following page using their fingers to poke and prod. 12 different doctors inserted unsterilized fingers and instrument into Garfield's back, probing for the bullet. Okay, I'm going to use this quote. So going back to my paragraph now, I'm going to put this quote here just so I have it for a minute. But then I'm going to introduce this quote, because when we have a quote, we can't just start with the quote or the piece of information. We actually have to say what we're talking about first and where it came from. So a good way to start that is, for example, is a pretty common beginning for a piece of evidence. The article, How Doctors Killed President Garfield, by CBS News, stated, comma, quotation mark. Then we have this, and I'll make this the same font here. You are more than welcome to copy and paste when you have information from an article we read, but make sure that you also change the font and things like that so it looks the same as the rest of your paragraph. So, for example, the article, How Doctors Killed President Garfield, by CBS News, stated 12 different doctors inserted unsterilized fingers and instruments in Garfield's back, probing for this bullet. When you're using quotation marks, you need to make sure that you introduce where it came from. Even if I don't quote and I just kind of generally talk about the article and sort of summarize what I read, I still need to state what the article name is and who was the author of it, which in this case was CBS News. So next I want to explain how this quote proves my point and is persuasively trying to prove to people that the doctors should be accused of his death. So one really good way to do this is this logical technique called if-then statements, and I mentioned this before. So I'm going to say the word if, and then I'm going to fill in some information here, and then I'm going to say then, and then fill in information here, okay? So if the doctors would have left the gunshot alone, they would then Garfield may not have died at all. So we have this if-then statement. If-then statement. If the doctors would have left the gunshot alone, then Garfield may not have died at all. So this is one persuasive technique here, is to say if-then. Another way to be persuasive is to add in those emotionally charged words. So if the uneducated, if the filthy uneducated doctors, uneducated, they were idiotic, filthy doctors, would have left the gunshot alone, then Garfield may not have died at all. See, by adding those terms in there that are like gross and negative towards the doctors, it helps be more persuasive. After we have our evidence and our explain, then we would not want another piece of evidence and another explain. I'm going to tell you to pause the video now and to write your paragraph up to this point, that you have a piece of evidence and a piece of explain. Now for our second piece of evidence, I'm actually going to use a quote from Georgia Bragg's How They Croaked, because it's more powerful in persuasion especially, to show that you're accurate if you have multiple sources that say similar things. So here I have his doctors were starving him to death. Garfield's whole body became infected. This is the quote that I'm going to use for the next part. So another example or you can just say also, in how they croaked by, I'm spelling croaked wrong. Give me a second. C? Oh, there's no C. By Georgia Bragg. She says and I'm going to go back here so that I get it right. His doctors were starving him to death. Period. And then the second part of that quote is, Garfield's whole body became infected. End quote. Again, make sure we've introduced. If you are doing a totally different quote because you are arguing this the other way, make sure that you introduce where the information came from and the author of it before you have the quote. Next, we are going to again use our if-then statements to explain this. So, if the doctors would have left, would have fed him and kept maybe just even fed him, then he might not have gotten infected. He might not have had as much of an infection and might not have died. Okay, so go ahead and pause and get yourself caught up to this point. All right, so now that we have our topic, a piece of evidence explain, piece of evidence explain, I am going to switch us back to green and we are going to write a conclusion statement stating our point and proving our self, that this is what people should believe, that the doctor should be accused of President James A. Garfield's death. So one thing that we want to do to strengthen our argument here at the end is to recognize that someone actually shot him, and tried to assassinate him, but that is not why he died. So a good way to do that is to even just say the words, even though someone tried to assassinate. I'm struggling with spelling right now. Good thing for spell check. That shouldn't be capitalized. Even though someone tried to assassinate President Garfield, comma, it was the doctor's lack of knowledge and dirty hands that ended up killing him, comma, so they should be accused of his death, period. All right. Again, one way to do this, you may write this in a variety of different ways, but the structure should be the same, and make sure that you are using accurate quotes. So go ahead and finish your paragraph now. Make sure that you finished your notebook and your assessment this week and turn those in by Friday.